So my name is Jon Haslag. I'm a GIS specialist with the Missouri Office of Geospatial Information, and I support Missouri State Parks. Also here with me is Debbie Briedwell. She's the GIS manager from ODNR. Just for a little background, I began supporting Missouri State Parks right around 2.5 years ago. At that time, several programs within state parks were making use of GIS on some level. In fact, the department had had GIS for around 20 years. However, most of the geospatial data at the time I came in was siloed. Now, whether this was between programs, between operating regions or sites, or even person to person in the same office, there was a lot of data, but not everybody could see what they needed, and nobody could see all of the division's geospatial data. This led to a lot of limited collaboration and a lot of duplication of efforts. While there were people in parks that saw this problem, there was no real plan for a unified GIS approach until we decided we needed a geospatial strategy. And the first step in developing that was a kickoff meeting with Esri, which Mike attended. And at that meeting, we had representatives of each parks program, and we identified goals, challenges, just different things that parks was facing that they thought GIS could be a solution to. From that meeting, a roadmap was created, and a big part of that was an asset inventory. And so 2 programs, Planning and Development and Cultural Resource Management, both proposed creating a system to update the way assets were tracked in parks. One was focused specifically on historic assets and condition assessments of those assets. The other was more broadly focused on cataloging all of the assets within the park system. This was everything from structures down to manholes. They wanted to track everything. So both projects stressed a need for visualization of all of their data. They wanted simple field collection, and they wanted the ability to generate reports based on the data they'd collected. And at the time, both programs were tracking assets through a shared access database, but the data in that database was not really GIS ready. But it was our starting point. And as you can see there, just of the structures, about 70% were lacking any kind of geospatial information, and the rest was kind of shaky for different reasons. So each program agreed that structures would be a good starting point for the inventory. From the previous data, the structures were the things that were the most fleshed out. And both teams produced and proposed a schema based on how their data was already structured. So they were running queries out of Access, and those were basically the starting points for our schemas. But since planning and development was going to be cataloging all structural assets, while CRM, Cultural Resource Management, was focused on historic assets, it was decided that we'd use P&D's schema as the base for the system. Along with the data that was already being tracked, both teams also proposed a set of new data that would be tracked for each asset and would be program specific. These came in the form of, for planning and development, major systems, and for cultural resource management, that historic condition assessment. These attributes were added to the base data as related tables that would be visible to anybody viewing the data, but would only have editing privileges given to the authorized program. This way, that data would no longer be siloed within the programs. So both teams started out wanting to use Collector. I mean, it's right there in the name. It is a field collector app. It was very intriguing to them. It was map-based, which they knew they wanted to visualize that data. But they quickly realized that the number of attributes they were collecting for each structure, which was over 100 at the time, could be daunting in the collector user interface. So I showed them the form-based nature of Survey 123. It's got grouping that is collapsible. We have conditional logic that can be applied to some of the data entry. Once they saw that, they quickly decided that they'd really like to have that in addition to collector. And of course, both teams wanted a web-based editor for pre and post field work and generating reports. And they also wanted a fancy dashboard for progress tracking. So pretty much every app I showed them, they wanted it. They wanted all the apps, and we were happy to give it to them. And so while the apps were still in the development phase, both teams began taking them out for pilot runs to nearby state parks. This is really when we started to discover how users were going to actually be using the field apps. From their feedback and observations we made while going out and shadowing them in the field, we made numerous enhancements to the way the apps worked. We refined domains, we refined pick lists and input mask and everything else. And this was really the stage at which Survey 123 was realized to be the clear favorite by our field crews for data entry. At this point, also, the collector arm of the project kind of became more of a park navigator and an information lookup. We were able to assign attachments to different features and things like that that would be useful for field crews, but the importance of collector more or less shrank at this time, and Survey 123 kind of took over as our preferred field app. And so with the users trending more towards Survey 123, we dedicated more time to that application, making use of various poll table functions and calculations to further automate the data entry and increase standardization of data whenever we could. And so another trend that began to arise during the pilot program was that both teams realized that they had asked for too much from the original data source. In the beginning of the process, there was a real push to adhere to the data as it had been recorded in that Access database and really to stick to that structure. But as the teams went out into the field and everyone involved with field collection came to the same conclusion that they were tracking just too many attributes. And a lot of them had very little bearing on what they actually wanted to accomplish with the system. And it was just a matter that with the old system, they had always just tracked things because they were there. Somebody at some point had put them in there and everybody just kept going. But as everybody started to see how agile the system we were building with the Esri applications was, you know, if something didn't serve the purpose, they were more than happy to get rid of it or to consolidate it with other things that would make it make more sense. And this is something that carried over well beyond our pilot program into production, where the Centralized Asset Management Program, or CAMP as we call it now, it's continued to be a fully collaborative effort between GIS staff and state parks. It's ever evolving. And the Central Asset Management Program entered its production phase in about May of 2019. So we've been at it for a little over a year. And in that time, we've surveyed around 70% of the structures across Missouri's 91 state parks and state historic sites. Over 150 structures that were not tracked in the previous tracking system have been added These were structures that had been built and just never added, and we found them and visualized them and everything else. And at present, 1,185 major systems and 156 historic conditions assessments have been recorded, and that's that program-specific data. Going forward with the system, we are currently working on expansion to track things like campgrounds, roads, elements of utility networks, such as water, sewer, and electric. And as we go, more programs are seeing the value of this unified approach. While they may not have a particular interest in structures, they do have an interest in unifying this GIS data so that everybody can see what's going on in these parks as far as planning and development goes. And beyond that, up-to-date data that we are collecting is already affecting budget allocations in park regions. They've already started taking this data and are using it to plan and prioritize repairs and replacements within the parks, which was really a main goal of P&D was this planning component. Thank you very much.